Welcome to the Wealth Done Differently Retirement Podcast. Danielle Howard, a certified financial planner, shares insight into the financial tools, techniques, and temperaments needed to make the most of your retirement dollars and relationships. Danielle bridges the gap between Wall Street and Main Street, bringing complex financial topics down to earth. Danielle will educate and inspire you as you define and refine your version of prosperity.
Hello and welcome to Wealth Done Differently Retirement with Danielle Howard, a certified financial planner. Danielle has brought in a special guest today, and that is Jason Gross. Jason is an examiner with the Colorado Division of Securities. Jason has over 16 years of experience in the financial services industry. He has held a variety of financial service roles that range from financial planning, supervision of high-risk transactions, and supervision of high-performing sales teams. He has held the Series 6, 63, 66, 7, 9, and 10 FINRA state licenses. And I'm just going to say this. If you don't know what all those are, that's a lot of work. I'll tell you that. That's a lot of study, a lot of work. So kudos to him for sure in that. And in addition, his formal education includes an MBA with a concentration in financial services. And he is a certified financial planner, a CFP, which again is a ton of study and a ton of work. Danielle and Jason, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you, Eric.
You bet.
I'm doing great. Thank you, Eric.
Jason, thank you so much for being on the show. Danielle, thank you for bringing him on. I'm eager to learn. First thing I need to learn is, Danielle, how did you and Jason start working together?
I feel it's really important for people to be educated about, the increasing complexity on how to protect themselves, especially in the investment world. I work with a lot of clients, and it is front and center with me every day on having conversations, whether it is protecting themselves around internet security or the variety of emails and, just everything that's coming at us every day. And we need to be very discerning. I think it's important that we bring in the regulatory authorities to help us understand what's out there and what's going on. Jason and I met through this inquiry as I look at educating, especially my valley locally. Mm-hmm. And Jason walked alongside us to put together some webinars in our local libraries to reach out to folks to educate them on what is going on from a regulatory status, as well as what people can personally do to protect themselves as well as the loved ones that they care about, because it is getting harder every day. Absolutely. So I greatly appreciate, again, the time that Jason has given to me and our communities, and his level of expertise and his willingness to serve in this area.
Nice. I'm looking forward to learning. Thank you, Jason, for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite, Danielle and Eric.
Today we're going to be talking about how to protect our loved ones, and then inherently in that, how we can protect ourselves. And I always put this little bit of disclosure out there for myself that I hope that you're going to glean some insight around, the fall season of life. Many of us who are either heading into or in the fall season of life, we have aging parents or aging relatives. And we want to take a look at, how do we protect ourselves and others? In my series of podcasts, we dig into a variety of technical pieces, and we may dig into quality of life in retirement. And I just want to make sure that you don't take any of this literally and personally until you talk to, your personal financial advisor or get expertise in areas that apply to your individual situation. And with that, I want to introduce Jason and what he does at the Department of Regulatory Authorities, and a little bit about himself.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Danielle. Real excited to be here on your podcast, and we'd love to have as much outreach to the public as possible. Real quick, I have a couple of disclaimers also. The comments that I make in this podcast, they're my own, and they're not that of the Colorado Division of Securities or the Commissioner. The Colorado Division of Securities, nor I endorse any specific advisor, broker, investment, or product. So real quick, just, the mission of the Colorado Division of Securities is to protect investors and maintain confidence in the securities market. The division licenses securities professionals, enforces securities law, and works to help Coloradans become more informed investors. You can always learn more about the Colorado Division of Securities online. That's www.colorado.gov/Pacific, PACIFIC/DORA, DORA/division, DIVISION -securities. That's SECURITIES. Now, what I do is I'm an examiner. So 80% of my time is spent working with and reviewing financial advisors or brokers. We review firms or individuals for adherence to the Colorado Securities Act. Most of the time, advisors understand the importance of regulation. So we have a really good working relationship with financial professionals and the public. And when I'm really, really lucky, I get to do some outreach education to the public, like today's podcast.
Well, I appreciate you joining us. I know in my industry, we are really focused. It is the hot topic. As we look at this aging population, it is the hot button. How can we safeguard our senior clients? And I have an 85-year-old dad who is very financially astute and an 80-year-old mom who would like nothing less than to never talk about money. And it's on my radar as I look at how do I talk to them? How do I look at protecting them? And how do I walk alongside my clients? So it's a very, intriguing subject for me. It's very important. I know that we are taking steps at the federal level. In 2018, they put together the Senior Safe Act, which allows, banks and investment advisors and brokers, financial planners to report if we feel that there's any suspected fraud, without being, fearful of, that we're going to get sued on the other side of it. So it kind of takes that, I always want to do the right thing no matter what. But I know for a lot of people, there's that, that issue out there. And we want to be able to identify and report any suspicious activity out there. We've also got, the FINRA Rule 4112, and that requires broker dealers to make reasonable efforts to get a contact person for, clients that we're working with. This is a contact person that we'd just be able to reach out to if we hadn't heard from a client. We don't share any information about accounts or, any specifics. But if we can't get a hold of somebody, or if we have concerns over somebody's health or mental capacity, it's another person, a family member, a friend, another trusted advisor that we can reach out to, just so we are, looking for ways to make sure that line of communication is open. And the fraud, the statistics out there are pretty crazy. Can you go into some of those, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. They are really, really crazy and concerning. And when it comes to financial fraud, there is people at the federal level, state level, organizations all trying to combat this. And the Colorado Division of Securities certainly fits into that. When we look at the stats, though, this is nationwide. 1 out of every 5 people over the age of 65 already have been victimized by financial fraud. And it's estimated that $36.5 billion, that's billion with a B, is lost annually in the U.S. Due to financial fraud, exploitation, and abuse of trust. So that's just kind of the headline on some of the stats. And I think as we have a further conversation, we can talk about sort of like what's the profile of those that are being targeted and what techniques are being used. But those two stats just really stand out to me, that 1 in 5 people over the age of 65 have already been victimized And we're talking about $36.5 billion in lost
Yeah,
funds.
I mean that number is crazy, and I've heard stories, and they're not what I mean. Some stories I've heard, are about the 80-year-old woman who receives an email from somebody she thought was Norton Antivirus, and she opened it, and they told her, "Oh, you overpaid, and we need to get this money back to you, and please get." In touch with us and give us your bank account number and we'll put the money back into your account. And she ended up losing $20,000. And we kind of have in our head, oh my goodness, it's the little old lady sitting at home by herself that is being exposed to this. But that is not true. Share with us the profile of those who are being targeted and those who are most likely to fall victim of that high dollar fraud number.
Yeah, those are all great points. I think we all tend to think of that stereotypical, widow at home, so to speak. And when we look at the profile for those who are likely to fall victim to a high dollar fraud, 2/3 of those victims are male, and that tends to be a big surprise to a lot of people. 2/3 of those victims are age 55 to 65 years old. May or may not be a surprise. 2/3 of investment fraud victims are very financially literate. That tends to be a surprise. 2/3 of these investment fraud victims are also college educated. They tend to have higher incomes. They're willing to sometimes take financial tips from friends, colleagues, and family, or they may be willing to take risk for big payouts. But I think the big surprising bullet points in there, to your point, is that 2/3 of these victims are male and financially literate and college educated with potentially higher incomes.
That's a surprising idea, I think, for a lot of people, because we all feel, oh, I'm smarter than the bad guys. I wouldn't fall for that scheme. I wouldn't, do anything silly like that. And I think one of the things that we've talked about is how our brains work on money and that they don't necessarily serve us well. And, I know we're jumping a little bit around, but the idea of, before we get into what type of scams are out there, again, looking at this high probability, if you're male and college educated and smart and financially literate, then you go, why? What happens? Why do people fall for this fraud? And I know I've done a lot of reading around how our brains work on money and how emotions play into that. So why don't we talk just a little bit about, how our brains work on money and how that plays into some of these common scams and the risk factors that are out there because our brains don't work well on money.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, later on we'll talk about some of these scams and how they operate. And, it's sometimes hard to imagine, like, how does anyone actually fall for these? I mean, are people really so gullible that, they won't question if these scams are legitimate? And that type of thinking is actually kind of faulty because not only because it might shame the victim into not coming forward when they are scammed, but when we believe we're invulnerable to getting conned out of our money, that's exactly the time that we are most in danger. And behavioral economists, what they call this is the illusion of invulnerability. And pretty much what that illusion of invulnerability does is it allows people to push aside sort of their analytical thinking. So when it comes to how we process information, what's interesting, and this is very oversimplified, and I'm certainly not qualified to talk in too much depth on brain and neural activities, but when we first process information, it goes through our limbic system. And that is the part of our brain that represents our emotions and our feelings.
That fight or flight or fear and greed, all the emotions that we feel around money are pretty, they can go to extremes.
Yeah, and that's our first filter. And then further along is our neocortex. which is the rational or thinking part of the brain. And so unfortunately, when it comes down to a battle between emotions and reasons, the way our brains are structured means that emotions tend to win out. And in fact, many times our rational brain is really just in charge of rationalizing what our emotional brain has already decided to do.
And just as a next step, my next podcast, we're going to be digging into some of how the emotions play into decision making. So I'll reference that to keep people posted for our next podcast. So how does this play into, some of the risk factors, and when we go to, events or things happen in our life, how does our brain work and create that opportunity to fall victim?
Yeah, well, since we're using our emotions first when we process information, I guess some risk factors of those who are more likely to fall victim to financial fraud in general is a willingness to listen to those telemarketers, robocalls, those calls from unknown parties, and they might be to attend some free lunch seminars or maybe some type of work from home opportunities or sweepstakes. Some other risk factors would be, if you're financially responsible for an adult child or a grandchild, there's certainly some emotional components attached to that. Maybe if you recently lost a spouse or partner or socially isolated, there could be a recent change in health or some type of major health event. If you have concerns about financial status, sometimes depression, anxiety can play into risk factors. And if someone's recently been a victim of a fraud or scam, then they're likely to fall victim again.
Interesting. Again, so when I think about that, I think about, the person who's investigating a work from home opportunity or is going to, fill out the information to possibly win a sweepstake. That might be the emotion of fear. I don't have enough. I need to make up lost ground. I need to attend a seminar in order to find out what the latest and greatest is because I haven't saved enough and I haven't done enough to make sure I'm secure in the fall season of life. And, I think of if you're financially responsible for an adult child or grandchild, the emotion of love and protection and provision and, responsibility there could lead you. So, to really identify what emotions would play out in these different risk factors, I think is, we need to create that awareness. And, I think that idea that many people, our parents or, family members who are aging, we want to make sure that they're not isolating because, now we'll understand, well, they're going to be more exposed if they're isolated and people could come in and take advantage of them. And so I think it's that awareness of what type of emotions can be triggered, and then let's look at some of the common scams that are out there.
Yeah, there's kind of three broad categories of common scams. Phone scams, so that might be like a IRS scam. Hey, you didn't pay your taxes, you need to pay it now, otherwise you'll be arrested.
I think I just sent you an email on one that I got.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah,
I can't wait to read that.
Yeah. Well, and it's and we'll talk about later. What do people do when you get this stuff? I get it. You report it as scam, as spam and delete it. But it's like, oh my gosh, really?
Yeah. And it's coming in from all angles.
Yep.
And, there might be like a lottery scam. That can be both online or phone call where there's some type of windfall. And you just need to pay a little bit up front, maybe some taxes or something, and you'll get this big windfall. That's a big red flag that it's a scam. Some online scams that are pretty common out there, sweetheart scams. This is where you might meet someone online and develop some type of relationship. And then they might need a little bit of funds to pay some bills, or maybe some funds to buy a plane ticket to come see you, so on and so forth. That's a sweetheart scam, or tech support scam. Sounds like you may have encountered that.
Yeah, the gal with the Norton antivirus, and they're a good company.
Yeah.
They're reputable. But somebody got that twisted and created a whole new thread to get people to pay attention and to respond.
Or some type of ransomware. They might lock down your computer. Hey, you have to pay me. I'm tech support and I can unlock this for you. But they're the ones that actually locked up your computer. The third category would be like investment scams. And just because of the nature of work that I do, this is kind of the area that the Colorado Division of Securities tends to work more in. And so we'll see things like Ponzi schemes. That's where funds are used to pay off earlier investors versus actually investing the funds. And the person's obviously taking a large cut of those. Or affinity fraud. We see quite a bit of affinity fraud. And that's when like a fraudster preys on a member of an identifiable group, such as like a professional group, might be a religious congregation or some type of like social group, social gathering. And they'll often enlist the leaders or respected community members who unwittingly kind of promote the scam for them. And the scam is usually promoted as some type of special investment that, members of that specific group should invest in. And because the fraudster is a member of that specific group, people tend to let down their defenses and fork over their hard-earned money. Victims often do not they don't report the issue to authorities, and instead they try to work things out kind of within the group, which really doesn't work out all that well. So those are kind of the three fraud categories of the scams that we're seeing: the phone, the online, and the investment scams.
And it's sad because those are kind of what we hear about. Those are what captures in the headlines. And, whether it's in Colorado or elsewhere around the country. And, we want people to trust their credible, accredited, the folks that are serving them. And unfortunately, in this industry, it has the bad eggs have made pretty much the industry kind of stink a little bit. So I think it's really important that people do their homework if they're going to get involved with a financial advisor, and not just go with what you hear is the latest and greatest, and kind of keep those emotions intact. I know you've got some persuasion tactics that are used with people, and why don't we touch on those a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can recognize some of these persuasion tactics, that's a good step in helping protect yourself. Or if you recognize these being used on someone that you love, that's a great first step. So there's kind of, I guess, like 5 very common persuasion tactics that are used against potential victims. And I think that your listeners will probably recognize some of these persuasion tactics because they're also used in like legal, everyday sales as well. And that's kind of a good thing because it does allow us to get some practice when recognizing some of these persuasion tactics being used. So one of them is called phantom riches. And essentially that's dangling some prospect of wealth, and that triggers, the emotional trigger is excitement, desire, fantasy, greed, that sort of daydreaming. Mm-hmm. And it's something like, I really need this, and wow, I can have this potential wealth in front of me, and all I need to do is maybe pay some taxes up front or pay some small fees up front. So phantom riches is one where there's this big payday, big lump sum out there. You just got to do something small to get to it. And the second persuasion tactic, you kind of hit on this, is source credibility. And, we as people, we want to believe that we can trust people in positions of like authority or, other advisors or someone who claims to be an advisor and who actually isn't. And the problem is that credibility, it can be faked. And
very easily.
Very easily. The emotional response kind of tied to credibility is, you're feeling like impressed, or you really won't like this person. You really want to trust this person. And what you can do is kind of independently verify some of those claims. Another persuasion tactic is social consensus. People tend to be almost have like a herd mentality. They want to be part of the crowd. They want to fit in.
Don't want to be left out.
No, absolutely not. And so if someone can create sort of this feeling of this is, something special that a lot of people are doing, that can draw people into wanting to be part of that crowd and kind of play into the social consensus piece of it. Another persuasion tactic that's commonly used is reciprocity. So that's doing a small favor in return for like a big favor. And the emotional flag kind of attached to reciprocity is feeling indebted. You don't want to take advantage of someone or freeload on them. So like a free lunch or dinner seminar, that's a pretty common example. And, if you go to one of these free dinner seminars, it could be perfectly legal. There's many of them out there. But, if someone's offering you this free lunch or dinner seminar, I guess start to question yourself if you begin to feel obligated to do that salesperson a favor. Another common persuasion tactic is scarcity. It's kind of the idea that if something's rare or scarce, then it must be like more valuable. And that kind of creates an emotional flag of like a sense of urgency or maybe fear of missing out, potentially even panic, like, there's only limited time. I've got to do this right now. Mm-hmm. That sort of scarcity mentality. And so these are, again, used in sales legally every day, but it's also used by these fraudsters. And I think recognizing it is a great first step in understanding these persuasion tactics that are used against you or your loved ones.
Thank you so much. One of the areas that is really tough to talk about is financial exploitation by family members or caregivers. And for somebody who is very appreciative of my own personal family dynamics and that we're, really good at conversations and we communicate well and everybody is on the same team, I have heard countless stories where that is not the case. And just to touch on that, we have a brief amount of time left. Can you share some of the statistics and some of the, the things that we need to be aware of when it comes to financial exploitation?
Yeah, absolutely. And most of the things we've talked about up to this point are probably done by like a stranger. When it comes to financial exploitation, it is someone that you know. Family member, friend, maybe a caretaker. And exploitation, just to kind of define it real quick, is it uses deception, harassment, intimidation, or undue influence to deprive an eligible adult of the use, benefit, or possession of anything of value. That's kind of like sort of like a legal definition of it. And because it is often perpetrated by someone that we know, what it is not is it's not a reason to be ashamed or embarrassed. It's not an indication that you're weak, stupid, or unlovable. It's definitely not an indication that you're a bad parent or that you don't love your grandchildren or children, whoever it is. And some of the stats, that you were asking about, 5.2%. So that's 1 in 20 of those 60 or older have been financially exploited by a family member. And that's according to a MetLife study of elder financial abuse. And of financial abuse perpetrators, 85.5%, so 85.5% are family members. Of that 85%, roughly half of those family members are from a child.
That's
when it
crazy.
comes to your loved ones, when it comes to your loved ones with dementia, 47% of dementia patients are mistreated by their caregiver. And oftentimes when we talk about these mistreatments, it includes financial matters, but it often goes further than that: physical, sexual, so on and so forth. So the stats are kind of interesting and maybe a little bit scary, but I think it's important that they're out there.
Yes. With that, I think, my goal with this podcast is to help people create an awareness, recognize what is out there and understand that we want to create more awareness around it. Do your homework, research whether your parents or family members or aging friends are involved with, different professionals, conversations around things. Do your research and make it okay to look at how you want to report. If you think of something is not right, it'd be better to investigate it, take a look at it, have a conversation about it, ask questions, than to brush it under the carpet. And I think if we can walk alongside our loved ones and the people we care about to help them understand and recognize what might be, some crazy, wild stuff that's going on out there, and then walk alongside them to do some homework and to help investigate and then do the proper reporting, we will serve the ones we care about even more. Can you speak to some of the sources to be able to do this reporting, or some areas that if folks have additional questions that they can reach out to?
Yes, absolutely. And earlier in the podcast, you also talked about researching an advisor. And there's a great website, investor.gov, that's ran by the United States SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. And that allows you to search your financial professional. You can verify that his or her license is in good standing. You can review any former disciplinary actions. You can look at his or her past work history. So I think that that's a great resource to evaluate your financial advisor. Now, as far as like reporting, when you find that your loved one or potentially you have fallen victim, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can definitely call local law enforcement, and we encourage you to do that. There's also, in Colorado, it's called Adult Protective Services. And out of state, sometimes they'll call them other agencies. They can help. A very, I think, great resource that is easy for a lot of people to approach would be AARP Elder Watch. And you can report fraud or financial exploitation to them, and they can sort of walk you the steps of, okay, who else do you need to report this to? And it's a very easy way to approach the subject. Their phone number is 1-800-222-4444. And when it comes to particularly securities, when we're talking about investment-related fraud, you can absolutely reach out to the Colorado Division of Securities if you're a resident here in Colorado or if your advisors here in Colorado. That phone number, 303-894-2320. And if you happen to be in another state, no worries, you can give us a call. We'll point in the right direction. There's also a national phone number for FINRA, which stands for the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. They have a securities helpline for seniors, and their phone number is 844-57-HELPS. So that's HELPS, or the numeric equivalent of that is 3577. So 844-57-3577.
Great, Jason. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your insight, your thoughts, your education around what I consider an incredibly important topic. For folks that are looking for somebody to walk alongside them with their own personal financial life or walking together as a family, you can reach out to us at www.wealthbydesign4u.com. If you'd like to listen to more of my podcasts, the blogs, the educational opportunities that come in a variety of flavors and ideas, you can take a look at Danielle Howard, DanielleHoward, u.com. And I wish everybody out there a safe and healthy and wonderful financial life moving forward.
Danielle, thank you so much. And Jason, thank you. What an incredibly important topic. And everybody listening to this podcast knows either a parent or grandparent that is getting up in years that really needs to have somebody help them make sure that they are safe. So this is a very timely topic as well. So thank you so much for presenting this today.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
You bet. And thank you all for listening to the Wealth Done Differently Retirement Podcast with Danielle Howard. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Danielle comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This will make it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family and those that you love that need this type of protection and this information. So please do that. And thanks again for listening. For everyone at Wealth Done Differently Retirement, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Done Differently Retirement Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Wealth by Design, LLC. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Danielle Howard, Certified Financial Planner, is an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer, member FINRA SIPC. Cambridge and Wealth by Design, LLC are not affiliated.